On June 9, 2015, there was a party at West Palm Beach, Florida in the United States. The guests attending the party were a dozen seniors who came from around the country. They shared a common identity. All are Jewish, and all had survived the Second World War in Shanghai.
Yes, I'd love to. I'm going to go back with him because I want to, now that I've been there with my father, I want to introduce my son to this part of our history.
We are family. Yeah, we are family. We feel like a family.
The hostess, Vera Sassoon, took out photos of previous gatherings. Though the people in these pictures are getting older and the crowd is getting thinner, the tradition of having annual gatherings has been preserved. They're not related by blood, but by the common experiences that connect them.
Everything is, yeah.
I remember everything about Shanghai.
Yeah. What little I can remember.
Many friends in Shanghai. Yeah.
He was a baby.
Joe, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I still keep in touch with my friends from Shanghai in the street where we lived, and in a lane, a street number was Changyang Loop, number 24 lane. Was a police station. On the corner was a police station. Yeah, the old version. We were on the third floor, looking right into the police station.
It was 70 years ago and 10,000 miles away, but they remember that Shanghai made the difference between life and death.
Every day going to school and have to see dead people on the street, that was my worst thing, to see those poor people suffering so much, dying from malnutrition and all that.
Sometimes I remember going after air raid out in the street and see a lot of people hurt and dying, and Chinese people and Jewish people, all dying, very seriously hurt.
Walk anywhere, you would see little children rolled up in straw mats, little babies that families couldn't afford to bury them, and that was a daily occurrence. That was, sad and very upsetting to see that, as a child, to see that.
When they came to Shanghai in 1939, China was in the third year of the counter-Japanese war. Though the Chinese fought dauntlessly in bloody battles, almost half the country had fallen to Japan. Except for the international settlement and the French concession, the rest of Shanghai was controlled by the Japanese military. However, in March 1939, the Japanese forced the Shanghai Municipal Council to sign what was called the Detailed Agreement on Peacekeeping in the Shanghai International Settlement. This gave the Japanese military the right to rule the settlement. Meanwhile, it used Shanghai as a base to tighten its control on goods and materials in the occupied areas of the country. Every day, new refugees flocked into Shanghai. Life became hardly bearable. On the night of August 20th, 1939, desperate famine victims stormed the rice shops and transport trucks, triggering mass plunder. Seeing this, Jewish refugees were seized by panic. Shanghai was their last chance. Should they be deported again, they would have nowhere to go. Steve Hofstadt is a professor at the Illinois College in Jacksonville. His grandparents were among the first group of Jewish refugees to flee from Vienna, and they went into exile in Shanghai. For more than 30 years, Steve has dedicated himself to the study of the Holocaust and the history of Jewish refugees in Shanghai.
When they landed at Shanghai, they had to get on a truck, the back of an open truck, and be driven to a place, the Embankment Building, which is across the Suchow Creek, where they could stay for a couple of days. But this was set up for them. They had beds to stay in, they were given meals, and then the first ones were able to begin to find apartments in Shanghai. But then when more and more and more came, it was harder and harder to find apartments, harder and harder to find work. Out of these 18,000 who came, perhaps 3,000 were never able to find their own apartment.
Jewish refugees have been coming to take refuge in Shanghai as early as 1938. and the numbers had just kept growing. On January 18, 1939, Shunbao newspaper reported that the number of Jewish refugees in Shanghai was huge, but that a few of them managed to make a living without the Committee for Assistance's help by selling their jewelry. Meanwhile, the committee had realized that simply offering free food and accommodation could never solve the problem of the refugees' survival. So they arranged for refugees to get skill training, enabling them to work as carpenters, blacksmiths, tailors, hairdressers, and bakers. Some even started their own businesses.
My mother brought things that she knew she would never use in Shanghai. She brought nice linens and laces and crystals and all kinds of art objects, whatever nice things she had. And when we got there, we were put up by the American Joint Distribution Committee. So my mother took all these items to the thrift shop, and with that money, she did two things. She bought an apartment in the French concession, and my father had studied to be a typewriter mechanic. She went to Sichuan Road and found a little office, hired a Chinese mechanic, and they set up a typewriter business.
Evelyn recalls that their main customers were French, British, and Americans, occasionally Japanese and Chinese. Back in Germany, her family was engaged in typewriter repairing and knew the business thoroughly. The business did quite well under the management of Evelyn's mother. Shanghai is an immigrant city inhabited by people from all walks of life. The arrival of the European Jews added a new people to the mix. Ruth's father, once the owner of a high-end shoe store, began to sell jam.
My father, my papa, was selling in these camps, refugee camps, jam. He took a little thing and put a couple of jams, and my mom was crying what had become of us. My papa, he was selling jam, but people bought, so we had to pay for the rent. And that is how he started.
Betty's father took two jobs at the same time. While selling medicine, he also did paperwork for a Chinese company. Perhaps Betty was too young at the time, or perhaps her parents kept things from her, but she rarely felt afraid.
I used to buy the rice in a sack on the black market during the war, you know, and there were a lot of bugs in there. We had this windowsill in our room, and we put the rice on there, and the bugs would come crawling out. And my sister would sit on one end, and I would sit on the other end, and the one who got the most bugs won the game. And then it was a game.
Remembering a childhood game, Betty is full of cheer. She's lucky now to have many children and grandchildren. Compared to her relatives who died in Nazi concentration camps, she is lucky to be alive.
Well, we played with children in the lane, you know. They don't know the meaning of the word anti-Semitism. They just accepted us. They just took us in. While we did not become lifelong friends, we felt comfortable with them.
What impressed me most was the welcome we received in Shanghai, how the people received us. We were the Nakonis, and they received us, they were happy with us, and we were respected. We were respected.
This is Mr. Chu, my mother, little sister.
In 1939, Vera's family, a total of 17 people, fled from Austria to Shanghai. They lived in Kunming Road. The little sister Vera mentioned was their neighbor, Mr. Zhou's daughter.
In his later years. And Mr. Chu would say to my parents, he said, you know, and he always made sure that when I came home from school that I stopped off at his home and had a meal with them. And then I would end up playing with his daughter, and it was really, for me, it was really a wonderful it's still, the memories are still there. And as I said, Mr. Chu was this wonderful man who more or less adopted me.
Leaving Shanghai in 1949, Vera has returned several times to look for Mr. Zhou's family, but without success. In 2011, she came back to Shanghai for the third time, and this time she asked for help from Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum. She left them Mr. Zhou's photo.
昨天来沪寻人的73岁犹太老人维拉，在各方的帮助下，终于找到了60多年前好心邻居周先生的后人。今天，维拉和周先生的女儿岳阳视频通电话，两位老人聊起陈年往事，依然如儿时般亲密。
维拉姐姐，我叫你姐姐可以吗
She's not calling you a sister, elder sister. You know, you're just like a sister to her.
My little sister. We're still the same two little girls. In our hearts, we're still the same two little girls.
She called the museum and she said she was watching television and she saw me being interviewed with a photo of her father, and she said, "That's my father." So then they arranged for a Skype interview, which was heartwarming.
现在是非常激动的，可惜的我父亲就是在2001年的时候没了。要是我父亲在的话，哎呀，我父亲也这个简直是不敢相信了，就是说这个事情。
Zhou Huizhen's father, Zhou Zhiji, worked for the British American Tobacco Company's Shanghai office. He spoke fluent English and introduced many customers to Vera's father.
I was really the envy of all my schoolmates because here was this man picking me up to take me home, and everybody wanted to run to him, "No, take me home, take me home." And he said, "No, no, no, I wait for my missy." And he only took me home.
我们过春节嘛，就是在家里面吃饭呀，接着吃饭，吃年夜饭，什么东西都是他们来吃的，3个人。 我们中国人嘛，就是一些鱼啊、肉了、什么菜了什么的，哎，我们家维拉都是放学的时候到我们家每天吃点心的，什么赤豆汤。打好了啊，希望能。
On June 14th, 2015, Zhou Huizhen and Vera video chatted again.
But tell your grandmother I can't wait for us to. Well, I'm not much of a cook, but I can't wait for her to make the bean soup. Okay, and hopefully in my kitchen in America. So hopefully she'll come and visit.
Her room is already all made.
是阿姨刚弄个房间都准备好了。是阿姨，要不侬看姨爷娘了海都没有辰光的照片了，上网头已经摆了海了。
Can you see? Ask if they can see it.
侬看得出啦？
Not being able to see Mr. Zhou again is an everlasting regret for Vera. She yearns to sit together with her little sister again and drink a bowl of sweet red bean soup, just like in the old days.
My cousin that Mr. Wu tried to save. She drew this for my parents when she was 10 years old.
So you keep it all the way.
Although this is home. She was murdered when she was 22 by the Nazis.
Like Vera, Ruth also thinks about a special Shanghai friend, Mr. Wu. In the second half of 1939, Ruth's father started in the fabric trade instead of the jam business. Selling fabrics on the street, he met Mr. Wu, who was in the import-export business.
He will give him space. He had the 3-4 room office. So he said, "1 room, I will build you a little cabinet with glass doors, and I will tell everybody here that you are selling in my office." He made us live again.
Ruth remembers Mr. Wu as being very rich and speaking excellent English. Mr. Wu vastly improved the family's situation.
And so he said one day, "I want you to go out of Hongkou." So he took us to wife number 2. On the top floor, a beautiful large room with a balcony and sunshine and a real bathroom with a bathtub and a toilet. Oh my God, we thought we were in heaven, And wife number 2, you saw, she was a simple woman, but very nice, very nice. And so that is how, through this way, Mr. Wu, I got to the famous Shanghai Jewish School.
At what is now 500 North Shanxi Road was the Shanghai Jewish School at the time. Ruth was one of the students there. She spent many years at the school.
This school is with me for my whole life.
For Ruth, it was a thrill to see the old stairs and classrooms again.
Hini, bet Sefer sheli. Hini, pishke boy.
You still remember on which floor is your classroom?
Yes, in back.
On the first floor.
On the first floor it was. And where is the dining room? Where Nelson, our head waiter, used to say he couldn't pronounce the R. So he said, Luti, we have curry, right? I said, I went about and I went back to the class. I hated curry.
Ruth showed us a book, a prize she received at the school. She has kept it ever since, cherishing it like the miracle that their Chinese friend Mr. Wu created for them. Thanks to the city's acceptance and their neighbors' kindness, the Jewish refugees shifted from struggling for life to having a life. Bakeries, coffee shops, restaurants, bars, and candy stores, Jewish-run businesses gradually emerged along the prosperous Zhoushan Road.
And this was right across the street. This is where my aunt's restaurant was. This is at the end of Chuzan Road. Yeah, I showed you the card, Café International, yeah. And this had a little candy store. I remember as a little child going by there and seeing candy for the first time, or chocolate, whatever. And I would just stand there and just look at it, you know, and with envy that, I wish I could have some.
Vera's aunt ran a coffee shop on the second floor of this building. Vera still remembers the sweet fragrance of candy whenever she thinks of Shanghai. This is life. Once you've settled down somewhere, then life becomes full of possibilities. In addition to the Shanghai Jewish School in the French Concession, another school was built especially for the European refugees, the Shanghai Jewish Youth Association, also known as Kadoorie School. It had hockey pitches for the girls and boxing classes for the boys. There were football matches on weekend at all levels, children's, teenagers, and adults. The fun would last all day.
We had played hockey, we had sports, and as a matter of fact, we had sports on what was then called the race course. Yeah, it was run by the British, like most of it in the area was run by the British. And so we had sports there. I got ribbons for running. I ran very fast. I ran races,
Outside the campus, life was also colorful. Chatting in a cafe, enjoying operas in a theater, watching magic shows in the parks. The most popular events were the concerts and performances at the Roy Roof Garden. Zhoushan Road was soon filled with shops, and the street was filled with people. Everyone called it Little Vienna. There was even a regular column named Jews in Shanghai in the Xunbao newspaper. An editor once wrote, "Coffee shops, small ballrooms, cinemas, barber shops, customs brokers, and even a Jewish brothel. Jewish businesses are everywhere."
So you made exchanges that way. And they recreated a little Europe, which again, I'm sure you've heard from others. You had musicians, you had concerts, they had probably recreated a nightclub. There were restaurants, there were cafes. It was like bringing Europe to Shanghai.
Shanghai for these exiles was a Noah's Ark in troubled times.
And I tell you, I'm very grateful to the city that we survived here. Because of surviving in Shanghai, I have 4 children. She's my oldest daughter. And I have 12 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. I created my own family. I'm an only child. One person surviving, I created all these people.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, leading to the full-scale eruption of the Pacific War. The bombing wiped out more than just much of the American Pacific Fleet, however. It also took away the increasingly peaceful lives of Shanghai's Jewish refugees. On December 8th, Shanghai was fully occupied by the Japanese army. The Japanese occupying authorities imprisoned Jews with British and American passports. They froze bank accounts of foreign residents from enemy states and blocked distribution of the relief funds sent by the JDC to Shanghai. Jewish refugees felt the same sense of horror as they had experienced on the Crystal Night.
After Pearl Harbor, most of her clients were interned. Her American customers, her British customers, her customers from the Benelux countries, they were all interned. So now the only customers she had were some French customers and even some Germans who did not mind doing business with a Jew, but it was not enough.
I was very poor, conditions were very bad, there wasn't enough to eat. We didn't know what would happen to us in the future. We were under the control of the Japanese military, who were not very nice people. We were scared of them.
When the JDC's funds were blocked by the Japanese in December 1941, the Jewish organizations in Shanghai only had enough money for a month. Thousands of Jewish refugees living on relief could be in danger of starvation. In the meantime, the JDC liaison in Shanghai, Laura Margolis, was in danger of imprisonment because of her American nationality. She later wrote, "My first conscious thought was, now I'm trapped too. I'll be no use to myself or to the refugees. How I wished I had heeded the warnings of friends and left while I still had the chance. Then I relaxed and, like the Chinese, shrugged my shoulders and said, Meo Fadza, there's just no way." Luckily, Laura was not imprisoned by the Japanese. After her pleading, the relief funds for December and 50 bags of wheat sent by the American Red Cross were released. Probably because Japan was afraid of mass deaths among the refugees, they surprisingly allowed Laura to borrow money from a third party. The JDC has preserved an affidavit of this loan. That authorizes Laura and Manuel to borrow $180,000 as 6 months relief funds for wartime aid. The authorizing party promises to return the money after the war. The Consul General of neutral Switzerland signed as a witness. This thank you letter sent from the refugees to Laura hangs on the wall of the JDC's New York office. The relief organization barely made it through December, however. By January 1942, money and food began running out. They had to cut the daily meal for 8,000 refugees to only 4,000 meals per day. By the third week of January, relief funds were down to just 2 more days' worth. Learning this, the Jewish refugees in Shanghai themselves began donating, raising $1,500 in 2 days. That was enough money for 1 more week. However, things kept getting worse. This 1943 communications log listed the death toll. 1940, 139 deaths. 1941, 182 deaths. 1942, the number almost doubled to 350. And even worse than the starvation was the Jews' fate being called into question once again. In July 1942, German Gestapo liaison Colonel Joseph Meisinger came to Shanghai from Japan. Upon his arrival, rumors about Meisinger's final solution in Shanghai started to circulate among the Jews.
German officials are coming here and saying to the Japanese, there are all these Jews, why don't you kill them? We're killing them over there, you should kill these Jews here. You should put them on a boat and send them out into the sea and sink the boat. Or you should create some sort of a gas chamber, you should kill them somehow.
Grandmother, grandfather.
Hallstatt has heard about the final solution in Shanghai from many Jews. Rumors about this plan became the refugees' nightmares.
He brought with him a Cyclone B gas container, which they used in Europe to gas people. And they said that that works and they should use that on the 20,000 refugees that were in this ghetto.
As a matter of fact, whether a final solution in Shanghai was ever officially proposed or not remains a mystery. Japan has never released information about it. Neither the government nor scholars has ever offered any confirmed information. The 90-year-old Michael Blumenthal clearly remembers the horror brought about by the rumors, however. He has been trying to find out the truth, and with his background, he has learned some things about the rumored solution.
Okay, let's go outside. We do know that the Germans sent some people from Germany to Japan and to Shanghai from the secret police, German secret police. And those people apparently suggested to the Japanese that they should kill us and that they would help them, give them technical assistance on how to do that. And as a matter of fact, there was a period when some of the Jewish leaders were told secretly that this discussion was going on.
When he was the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Blumenthal paid many visits to Japan. He asked Japanese officials about the solution, hoping to find out the truth.
I have asked them many times. When we ask them, they say they don't remember anymore, and they have no records. They have no papers, no archives, no information about that. I don't believe that's true, but that's what they say. Unlike the Germans after the war began to honestly talk about the terrible things that happened and to apologize for them and to make amends, to try their best to pay compensation for the victims. The Japanese, it has to do with losing face. The Japanese don't want to admit any of that, so they say we don't remember.
The existence of a proposal for the final solution in Shanghai is not yet confirmed, but in any case, it did not happen. A new change in their lives did happen, however. A new name came in, the Shanghai Ghetto. It was a restricted living area for the Jewish refugees, isolating them from the rest of the city. The Jewish refugees were about to lose their freedom once again.